Hello everyone, today's video is going to be educational for beginners. Many people wonder, what should I play against this move or that move, what openings I should choose, what continuation is better, and in the beginning level it doesn't really matter what opening you play, you just need to develop your pieces pretty quickly, try to castle, do not play many moves in a row with the same piece, but I'll try to give you a few options, explain you a few plans how you can play, and try to help you to get better at it. And the first option, I don't know if it's like should be top three or just three options, but we'll start with Caro-Kann defense. And this is a very solid opening against e4. Today we're going to talk only about moves against e4. If you, by the way, want to some other videos like that against first move d4 or best openings for white, let me know in the comments. So, Caro-Kann defense. It looks like after e4 we play in c6. You can ask why is it so? What a weird move. What do we want? And what we want is to fight for the center. We want to play d5, which will open up the road for our bishop. He will be able to develop pretty quickly. Plus, we will undermine the central pawn of white, and we will have a nice pawn structure in the center. Yeah, it's not like more standard d5, which we'll also discuss pretty briefly. So many people right here play d4 because the rest of the moves not that good. d4 is a decent move because white fights for the center in that case, and center is always an important pawn in chess if you want to play for a win, if you want to get that position. So after d4 we play d5 straight away, and there are several options are possible for white. One of the most frequent one is knight c3. White brings a knight in the game pretty quickly, defends the pawn on e4 that we have just attacked, and how our plan should look like. We of course don't mind taking. It opens up also our queen. We have some pressure on d4. And after knight e4, our main mission is to try to develop pieces as quickly as possible. First one, bishop comes to the play. Why not knight? Even though it's possible, you will double your pawns. Double pawns is not the greatest concept for beginners. And after bishop f5, you attack in the knight. Your opponent needs to do something against it. He needs to defend it somehow. Usually and normally people go knight g3. If your opponent moves to c3 or somewhere else, the plan would be approximately the same, so we'll just check the main line. We go bishop g6. Right now already we have one piece developed, and how our general plan looks like. We want to develop the knight to f6, another knight to d7. We want to play e6 so that our bishop had some scope and could be developed, and let's say go to d6, then castle short, and our development is successful. We can move on, we can try to develop the queen maybe to some active spot, later play, I don't know, try to move rooks to d8 to e8, try to play e5 or c5, and try to break through in the center. But of course, all your actions should depend on what your opponent does. If let's say he will play queen h5, I would not recommend you play knight f6, because I guess taking the queen for free would be a pretty good option. And yeah, let's say if your opponent plays some knight f3, we develop. If let's say your opponent offers you a trade, we don't mind trading. You can of course wait until he takes, because then you will have an open file for the rook. But I would say that taking here also pretty good. And then you're trying to develop pretty quickly. If your opponent goes to f4, also no big deal. You can develop on e7, go in castle short. If, let's say, your opponent being tricky and he knows some theory, he might play h4 right here. And as you can see, bishop has no squares where to go and he will be trapped. Therefore, you need to help him out. And for this, you can just play h6. Because if you play h6, your bishop will have some window to escape. And he's pretty comfortable over there. And the plan is generally the same. Let's look at other lines. For example, some people take, and Magnus Carlsen counts it as the best move, as long as I know. In my file on the computer, it's even written like Magnus file or Magnus line. The main idea is that white wants to develop somehow. The most solid way is bishop d3, c3. But on practice, people can play in a very different way. Let's say knight f3, and our main plan would be a bit different from the previous one. We want to play knight c6. Ideally, we want to go to g4, play knight f6, e6, bishop d6, castle. So pretty similar, but only now we would like to play bishop g4, because from here you can create a pin on the queen, on the knight, and your knight from c6 will be able to support your push on d4. Later on, plan can be different. You can try to move the bishop back and play queen d6, trying to create a battery for the mate, or like play rook b8, b5 before, but we'll talk about it. So yeah, if your opponent somehow randomly playing, you might actually even try to win a pawn if he's blundering something, because right now after bishop f3, queen f3, you grab a pawn for free. But if he defends, then yeah, your plan might look like this. You're just developing, trying to castle, and then, as I said, one of the plans can be to try to deliver the mate, another plan can be to play rook b8, b5, b4, because the c3 pawn might be vulnerable, and if you undermine it and then take on c3, your opponent will have a backward pawn, which is a well-known weakness, and it's good for you because then you will have an object for an attack. If your opponent even plays this line correctly and he knows everything, still, I mean, nothing scary, you're doing basically the same. Also, there is a sharp line, which called Panov attack, with an idea to attack your center immediately. And if, let's say, you take, which is not the good move, he can play bishop c4, the bishop comes to the game with the tempo, and all white's pieces get natural fast play, even though white has a drawback such as an isolated pawn. In that case, I recommend you just to develop. Right now, you wouldn't really have chance to develop the bishop somewhere. It might be risky because of queen b3, and after this pawn move to c4, white can be really nasty with all this idea. So you just need to play e6, and how your development should look like. You should castle, and you can use fianchetto to go b6, bishop b7, where your bishop will be on the long diagonal. If your opponent takes, whatever you like, you can take with the pawn, you can take with the knight, both options are possible. If, by the way, your opponent develops, you can try his bishop work twice by taking and forcing him to play two moves in a row, which is not that great. And later, you can finish your development pretty easily, the way I said. And the last line in the list, it is e5, because after e5, what white wants. White wanna try to grab a lot of space and to really make your pieces struggle, because let's say right now knight cannot go to f6, knight cannot go to h6, the only piece who is available to move is the bishop. But I would not recommend playing bishop f5, even though it's the most popular move, because very often your opponent might try to start attacking your bishop, and let's say your bishop will have a lot of trouble, even though it's all theory, but for beginners it's better not to do. You might surprise your opponent instead with a move like c5. And you probably would think that I'm nuts, what do I offer, why do we give up a pawn? But the idea is that we will take it back. And the opposite, we're trying to attack the center. So if your opponent, let's say, takes, you can play e6. And as you can see, your bishop is already hitting the pawn on c5, and he can come to the play with the tempo. And if your opponent being greedy and tries to defend it with b4, you can try to fall this like wall, try to attack it, try to undermine it. And if your opponent play an a3, then boom, ab, and you tricked him because the rook is hanging on a1. And if, let's say, your opponent plays c3 and being more sophisticated, you can still continue your undermining operations, blowing up his pawn structure and taking back what belongs to you. Bishop e3 right here also doesn't change anything. You have a knight who is able to attack two pieces at a time, 2 pawns at a time, and you can get it back. Normal move would be knight f3, and later on, what you want to do is to try to play knight c6, then go knight e7, then castle, then maybe go knight g6. You can attack the pawn from different angles, queen can help you out, bishop is already on active spot, but he's not drunk, he's not looking to f1. looking at f2. And you can then later play maybe f6 if your opponent defends this pawn quite well. So this is it. This is Caro-Kann defense. I didn't cover all the lines, but I covered sufficient structures because, I don't know, your opponent might play right here some moves like bishop c4 and be punished with d5. So these are main plans. And we go to the opening number 2, and this is Sicilian. Sicilian defense is like a perfect opening for all the levels, especially for beginners, because you might surprise your opponent. This opening is more sharp than the previous Caro-Kann, in my opinion. It has a lot of lines, but I'll try to cover only all essentials without gambits. But if you're interested in a more deep opening course, let me know in the comments. The main move right here, knight f3, because white trying to undermine the center, not undermine the center, but just fight for the center, play d4, trying to be dominant right here. There are many systems in Sicilian, like a lot. It's like very complex opening. Let's say there is a dragon variation, systems with g6. There is a Nider, which you probably heard from all the holes from all over the internet, which looks like this. There are some like Sveshnikov variations that Magnus Carlsen likes playing, but to be honest, it's like super anti-positional, and for beginners, it's just forbidden to play. So I will show you what I think, which is the best. There is a move e6. E6 idea is that we want to develop pretty quickly. If your opponent does nothing, you want to also fight for the center, and e6 move prepares it. White usually plays d4. We take. Nobody usually takes with the queen because it's a waste of time. And knight d4 is the move. Here we want to play knight f6. After it, we attack in the pawn, and the first question that probably should pop up in your head, what if our knight is being attacked by the pawn? Then you can stop the video because this is a tactical exercise. You can try to spot tactic. For it, you need to consider forced moves, which is checks, captures, attacks. Right here, we don't have any captures, but we have a decent check, which is queen a5, creating a threat on the king, on the pawn, and here you are, you won a pawn, congratulations. It's already a very nice start for you because you're up material. If your opponent is smarter, and let's say he goes knight c3, you want to play knight c6. And this is like some 4-knight variation. What's our main plan right here that you need to know? We want to play bishop b4. And many people really fall for this trap. They standard continue developing like bishop e3, bishop e2, stuff like that. And then you throw bishop b4 at your opponent. And then already you have knight e4 threat. So if your opponent continues development, you say, no, 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 slow down, I'm getting your pawn for free, then maybe another one, and everything is perfect. Let's say your opponent tries to defend it with f3, with bishop d3, doesn't matter. You can just play d5. Why do we want to play d5? Because right now this pawn is backward, and this square is weak. And if, let's say, knight crawled right here, it wouldn't be great for you. So we want to play d5, we and fight for the center and attack our opponent and get rid of our weaknesses. And let's say already after ed knight takes, you have a double attack in the position on the bishop and on the knight. In case your opponent takes intermediately your knight, you have a very solid center, and if you ever get attacked, you can easily go to d7. Right now you will have a perfect center. You can try to, I don't know, play c5, d4, develop the bishop, everything is fine. With other moves, it's basically the same. Bishop d3, you also go d5. Everywhere you don't mind going d5. By the way, if your opponent, let's say, tries to take you in the middle, you usually want to take with the c pawn, because you want to take from the flank to the center, because center is very important thing in any position, and you want to occupy it. Later you can castle, finish development, and start storming with your pawns. But be careful, by the way, sometimes there is a huge temptation to play d4 and say that all the tactics didn't go in vain, you worked hard. But your opponent might really outplay you, because after bishop d4, queen d4, seems like we up a piece, but then there is a brutal bishop b5 check, hanging your queen, and this is a pattern that's better to be avoided for you as black. So this is basically the same plan. After bishop e2, it's the same. Everywhere it's the same. There is one good move of your opponent, which is knight b5, trying to get to d6. But you shouldn't be really scared about it, because you can play bishop b4 anyway, still threatening knight e4. And if he plays knight d6 check, you don't want to take, because then you will have a lot of trouble. You will play against the bishop pair and you will have a lot of holes, but instead you can play king e7. Yeah, you play with the king and the opening, you will not have a direct castle, but if, let's say, your opponent takes, your development speaks for itself. You like attacking, later you can play rook e8 and anyway castle with your king. And if your opponent insists on trying to defend this knight, you can play e5, attacking and the bishop and the knight. And if we continue this a bit already complex line with knight f5, if your opponent is a real nerd and know what's going on right here, you can run away, bishop is under attack, pawn is under attack, and after bishop g5, you can strike with d5. Again, following the same logic, bringing more pieces to the play. If your opponent ever takes on c6, you take, and if e5 you have knight d5, you're totally fine. Also, quickly to cover other opportunities. Let's say if your opponent plays c3, many beginners like playing it because it's a typical fight for the center. After d4, let's say takes, white will have an amazing center. So we want to play against it. For it, we have a d5 move. And d5, like huge torpedo, just trying to undermine the center faster than your opponent does it. And if he takes, you develop the queen, but your opponent is not able to play knight c3 to attack your queen. And later, after d4, you can develop your pieces extremely quickly, the way like we did in the Caro-Kann. Only your queen is on the active position supporting it. Another play, people sometimes play knight c3, trying to play or Grand Prix attack or close Sicilian or some other weird setup. For these situations, you want to play g6. You can still play e6 if you want, but I find g6 better. You just need to remember one little plan. Later on, your bishop dominates because your opponent didn't fight for the center, and your bishop is really, really strong. Therefore, you don't want to play knight f6 because it will close your bishop. But instead, you can play e6, knight e7, castle, and later try to fight for the center. This is also the plan. And these are, again, essentials. I don't want to go deep into the forest. And the last option, remaining, top number 3, top number 1, I don't know how to call it, but third option, which is also very easy to play, very easy to learn, and you need to know some plans. First option was something solid, second one was more attacking, and this option I would also define as solid, pretty simple to learn, especially for lazy people. It's Scandinavian. Probably you've seen a lot of videos on YouTube, especially like from Gotham Chess, or maybe some other creators. That's a pretty solid opening, especially if you're in the beginning of your way, because idea is that you're undermining the center pretty quickly, and 99% of people would probably take, because if not, I mean, you just pick up the pawn. Let's say if your opponent takes, there are different options, like knight f6, not, this is knight f5, never mind, knight f6 and queen d5. Queen d5 would be for a start. Let's talk about that. After queen d5, yeah, this move has a drawback. Because after knight c3, we already developed the piece, and we would have to play twice in a row with the same piece, especially the queen, and we don't want to do it. But this is a concession that we can make, because later we have a very rapid development for pieces very similar to the Caro-Kann opening. Usually better to go queen a5, because if your opponent plays d4, you will have a pin on the king. And let's imagine your opponent does it, you want to develop the knight first, and later there are several plans available. First one is more solid, second one more fun. Let's say like Magnus Carlsen won a game against Bill Gates in some like, I don't know, fun game in a very similar way. So the solid way is to play c6, because in case your opponent wants to assassinate the queen and trap it somehow, you would have your door back. And let's say right now you can develop. By the way, you can develop to f5 or g4. I honestly prefer more f5 because then you take away d3 square, you put pressure on this pawn, and you cannot be attacked by h3, g4 like many people can do. So let's say we go bishop f5, and right now, if let's say knight tries to create discovered attack, you can easily back up somewhere, and you would be on the safe spot. Let's say your opponent develops somehow, you want to place your bishop somewhere, you want to play 6, and then after knight bd7, bishop d6, castle, you have a perfect development, very similar to the Caro-Kann, but only you need to learn less lines, and later you can play bishop g4, queen h5, even trying to deliver the mate with a combination with the bishop from d6. Um, what is other option available? Other option is more fun, knight c6. The approach is very like impotent, really fast, furious. We want to play bishop g4, castle, and create many pins, especially the one on the d file, because later we want to play e5, undermining the whole pawn chain in the middle. Let's say if your opponent tries to attack you, no big deal. You can go knight b4, and you're already attacking the pawn 3 times when your opponent defended with way less. And after some bishop c4, you can develop bishop g4, play castle. Let's imagine your opponent just doesn't know what he does, plays bishop e2, and after that you can play bishop g4, attacking the center, and for example after castle castle, you attack in this pawn, and it's very hard to defend it. And after some bishop e3, e5, you apply a lot of pressure, you have a threat of winning a piece by creating a fork, and that's why it's so strong. It has one drawback, and this drawback is bishop d2 move. And then after bishop g4, there is a very tricky response, knight b5, attacking your queen. After it, you can go to b6, trying to hide, and if your opponent tries to trap you with c5, you can take on f3, removing this knight, and you can win a pawn on d4. You can say, woohoo, good news, we won a pawn. Reality, not that smooth, because we lose the pawn back, and then we probably need to trade queens, and then try to develop as quickly as possible. We're attacking the bishop. Later maybe you will have a check if your opponent moves the bishop away, and it's playable. Yeah, it's risky, yeah, computer maybe dislikes it a little bit, but it's worth the risk because many people will not know what to do, and this attack will pay off, and that's the reason why it's so strong. Knight c6 can be a really good remedy. Other options available for white right here, playing some nonsense e5, but then you can play c5, knight c6, and control the center, developing the pieces quickly, and also knight c3. After that, if you want to be all fancy, you can try to grab a center, and later on just try to develop your pieces very quickly. Another way can be to play knight f6, attack in the center. In terms of capture, you capture back, your knight in the middle, you're fine. If your opponent plays f5, there are many options. You can go back, you can for fun play d4, counter-attacking, and then after ef dc, let's say capture capture, after all this massacre, you end up having more or less playable position with the bishop on the long diagonal. Probably people might wonder why I do not recommend playing e5, just the final conclusion. e5 is not the great opening because there are many gambits, and all the videos all over YouTube will be about gambits, and many beginners know them. Let's say there is a king's gambit, where there are a lot of sacrifice openings that you can fall for. Or let's say there is some Evans gambit, for example, after bishop c5 playing b4. Or let's say after knight f6 there is a two knights opening, which is really scary with a lot of complications. Or let's say there is a Scotch gambit by playing here, playing c3. Or like there is a like d4 and c3, basically the same. Some like Norse opening, or I mean I'm not good with the names. So many like I mean, e5 is a solid opening, but there are many gambits, and it will blow up your mind knowing all of them. That's the reason why I don't recommend it. And this is it. These were my 3 recommendations. Please comment what you think. Do you agree with the list? What other openings you would like to know about? Ask any questions if you're interested in all these lines, and please like and subscribe. It's not hard for you, but we with my friend Vladimir creating content for this channel, it would really be helpful for us and we would really appreciate it. Have a nice day and goodbye.